next to the piano. Do we have any takers? For the last 20 years, for as long as he has been the executive director of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, no one in America has been a more persistent and outspoken advocate for religious liberty and the principle of separation than the Reverend Barry Lynn. We have heard him explain and defend our First Amendment freedoms in the halls of Congress, on television and radio, in newspaper columns, and in his 2 published books. In addition to being a civil liberties lawyer and activist, he is also an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ, a denomination to which Neal Jones belonged before becoming a Unitarian. Their paths crossed in 2008 when Reverend Jones founded the Columbia chapter of Americans United and served as one of the 4 ministers who were plaintiffs in AU's lawsuit to halt South Carolina's explicitly religious I Believe license plate. Reverend Jones presently works closely with Reverend Lynn as a member of AU's National Board of Trustees. We are honored to have in our pulpit today another minister who preaches with the Bible in one hand and the U.S. Constitution in the other, Reverend Barry Lynn.
Well, good afternoon. I was really honored when Neal asked me to participate in this installation service, and I was particularly relieved that he didn't withdraw his invitation. Earlier this week, when a video began to circulate on the internet featuring a former Navy chaplain who was producing a video to prove that I was possessed by a demon. I've been called a lot of things, but the whole demonic possession thing awaited the introduction to this event. It's nice to be back in South Carolina. It's nice to have a lot of things. It's nice to have the 2012 election over. It's nice to have both the pleasure and the gridlock of the inaugural celebrations over in Washington, D.C., where I live. And it's also nice to see that you are here today instead of watching the run-up to the Pro Bowl or planning the 2016 South Carolina presidential primaries. It's always great for me to spend time in a pulpit or in even the basements of Unitarian Universalist fellowships, congregations around the country. One morning a couple of years ago, on Pat Robertson's daily television program, he was criticizing some action taken by Americans United for separation of church and state, and specifically mentioned me, as he often did, noting that I was a Unitarian minister. Someone from the Boston office of the Unitarians called me the next day to inform me that 4 people had called them the previous day, congratulating the Unitarians for having persuaded me to leave the United Church of Christ. Now, this, of course, turned out to be one of a calculated 168,744 errors that Pat Robertson has made and articulated on that program. But I do feel comfortable here in spite of my wildly controversial and continuing Trinitarianism. Look, you can't become a Unitarian pastor overnight. I mean, Neal is the evidence of that, isn't he? He has been your minister for 8 years, and you're only installing him today. Back when he was first a part of this body, gasoline was, I looked it up, $1.89 a gallon. Of course, there may have been some special circumstances with Neal as well. He was ordained a Baptist. He then did serve, as was previously noted, as a UUCC minister. He even served as a Moravian minister in North Carolina before he came here. You were probably concerned that he just might leap over to the Reverend Sun Moon's Unification Church, or perhaps even start a cult all by himself. That's probably good denomination weighted. He's clearly settled in here, and I think you are very lucky to have him here, just as I am very lucky to work with him as a member of the Americans United Board of Trustees. I did first become aware of Neal when he started a Columbia chapter, and became a plaintiff in one of our major lawsuits back in 2004. It's always nice to have a respected, articulate community leader as the face in one of our major lawsuits. We aren't always that lucky. In a case we filed at just about the same time, our original plaintiff was in an Iowa State prison serving a life sentence for murdering a member of his family. We won that lawsuit with his help, by the way, anyway, but it was just more difficult to get the television cameras in to record the sentiments of the victors. It's tough being a plaintiff in some of our lawsuits because no matter where you reside, religion is an overwhelmingly significant part of how people identify themselves. In fact, if they reject all religion, even that becomes a fundamental definition of who they are in their communities. And whether you're a believer or a non-believer in a deity, it's often the central way in which you define yourself. And when you as a plaintiff find that the defendant entity, usually the government, thinks you are actually trying to trace on its rights, it ticks them off. And it ticks off a lot of other people in the community as well. Most of you probably do remember the content of that lawsuit. The state of South Carolina was about to stamp out and sell license plates with the words, "I believe," unless anybody wondered what you were believing in. It had iconic images of a cross and a stained glass window. Legal issue was whether this gave Christians in the state a kind of preferential treatment. The state and a lot of angry South Carolinians thought it most certainly did not. I wonder if they would have thought the same thing if the state had decided it was going to print and sell plates with a star and a crescent. I don't think that was ever tested, but I'm guessing they wouldn't have taken the same position. As a practical matter, of course, there are legal ways to display your belief on your motor vehicle in this and every other state. You can put flags on your radio antenna, and I know some of you still have them. And you can also put a fish, or a fish and a cross, or any kind of other emblem on any piece of metal on your car, and of course on bumper stickers as well. I thought Neal, though, the very best practical and theologically sound response to this lawsuit when interrogated once on television, he said, "My religion won't fit on a license plate." I stole that. I used it on the Bill O'Reilly show once. See, but what you have in Neal is not just a person who sticks his neck out once and then rests on whatever comfort or laurels come from that. There's a hymn that I used at my own ordination service called "Once to Every Man and Nation." It was written by James Lowell back in 1845 as a protest against participation in the war in Mexico, which had as its intended purpose a continuation and expansion of the slave trade. And one verse in that hymn goes, "Once to every man a nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side." And I still like that hymn. I gender neutralize it. I like it a little more, but I also realize that there's something else. So often, once turns out, as I think Jacqueline Suzanne said, once is not enough. There's an ongoing set of dilemmas and troubles and ethical quandaries and challenges that we face both individually and as a nation. We don't have the leisure, the luxury to just find one and then be praised for playing some small role in fixing it. Neal's commitments are not just to one cause, but to many. And all you need to do is Google News him to find out where he stands on a whole lot of things. So in recent months, he's part of the Gay Pride Parade events here. He is speaking at the rally to unite against the war on women. And he's promoting the need for quality public schools and not diversion of resources to private and religious institutions through school vouchers. He wrote in one of your local papers, "Christianity in America has divorced itself from the compassion of Jesus." And sadly, we're seeing that happen not just here, but all over the country. So it's little wonder then that there are people like Neal who need to be engaged in so many issues in so many venues because the battle is broad, the battle is sweeping, it is not over, and it rarely even puts itself on hold. I worked for a while for a United Church of Christ minister named Gary Oniki, who spent much of his childhood in an internment camp for Japanese Americans during World War II. He had always told his new colleagues that he believed in something called the be principle. You had to be there if you intended to fix what was wrong. You couldn't just pontificate. You had to be directly involved in making things happen. He also thought your actions needed always to be undertaken at every level, from the international to the national to the local. And when I read through the web pages of this place over the past year, I can see that with Neal's leadership, you have done just that. For example, most of you, and Neal are certainly environmental activists, I'm sure that you rationally and intellectually care about fracking, you care about climate change, you care about mountaintop mining removal, and things that aren't necessarily close to home. But when it comes to home, you seem to be walking the walk as well. When you dedicated your memorial garden, it seemed to be much more than just a fond remembrance of the past, but an inspiration for the future, as we learn from the past and celebrate the human and the natural beauty that is together a part of all of us. You know that old Unitarian joke, why did the Unitarian cross the road? Answer, to support the chicken in its search for its own path. But what happened? Neal's most recent service of blessing for the animals, he blessed dogs, everybody does that, and a lizard, and a chicken. Now we've done these things at churches that I've been a part of, and there's always a little blowback. People blessing the animals. I mean, is this really that serious? But I really like those events because they remind me that we aren't the only species on the planet. That when Noah, literally or otherwise, it took 2 or possibly 7 of each animal, he didn't leave out the ones that just creeped a couple of people out. So Neal is not just merely a prophet in the sense of speaking the truth, even if it offends the majority or offends even some powerful political entities. You're going to hear more about the prophetic actions of Neal from Delegate Gilda Hunter shortly. But he's also trained to be pastoral at the times of greatest challenges in our personal lives, and that's both a human and a spiritual mandate. As he suggested in his very first sermon about the horrific shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, sometimes an individual in grief doesn't need, this wasn't his example, but I think he'd agree with this, doesn't need Joel Osteen to go on the Today Show and explain why God did something or allowed something to happen. That would be an answer from the intellect, not an answer from the heart. And he is trained academically to give those heart implications as well. And he's trained by human experience of decades to function that way as a pastor. You don't get much more rounded than having someone who is prophetic and pastoral in the same persona. Although Dan's going to tell you shortly about his priestly role, I'm actually going to be taking notes about that because I really don't know what Unitarian priests do. I think we pretty much established already that I am really low church. When I see Neal at one of our Americans United board meetings, he asks me how I am. I think he really wants to know. He's not doing it as a courtesy. He's not doing it because it's a formality. He's doing it because he connects with the people that he meets and he cares about and he works with. Part of the magnificent human touch he brings is a recognition that sometimes people don't get things done that they want to get done just because they don't seek answers or at least thoughts from other people. So Neal's called me to give him counsel on matters involving all of the communities in which he's involved. Others fail to get things done because they don't look for the right kinds of compromise. They fall back on what so often happens in Washington. I refer to it as the idiot's compromise. You cut things down the middle and make everybody hungry. Neal, on the other hand, is a seeker of creative compromise. Most recently for me, an innovating thinker in the process of redefining the complex governance structure up at Americans United at a time when the old rules were simply inadequate for new forms of decision-making. The creative compromiser is the person who works with others to solve a problem with innovation and mutual respect without ever jettisoning those core principles or postponing real advancement until some long distant day in the future. Neal Jones won something not too long ago called the Thunder and Lightning Award here in South Carolina. I couldn't really find out much about it, but I sure like the name of it. And I'd like to finish this sermon by telling you why I like it. Because there's a very big storm coming to this country, a radical redefinition of what religious freedom and religious liberty mean. And I expect Neal and the Unitarian Universalist communities and fellowships of this country to be in the forefront of redirecting that storm. Pat Robertson once prayed a hurricane, he said, away from his empire in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It hit New York instead. Apparently there was nobody in New York to pray it to Maine. The one I'm describing, though, is a philosophical and a legal tempest, and it cuts to the heart of what America represents. There are religious and political calls to craft a radical redefinition of religious freedom. It's based on a false claim, it's fraudulent, it is incorrect in regard to the use of common sense, the history of the First Amendment, or the diversity of the current American experience. But we're hearing it articulated more and more, not just on Drudge Report or cable television, but infusing itself into articles and writings and regular television and radio. Of course, we all know that religious liberty, religious freedom means something important. It means that the government can not tell churches what to believe. It means that we try to accommodate religious observances that don't significantly and adversely affect the rights of third parties, of other people. Government, we know, can't play favorites among religions or even between theists and atheists. It means that persons of faith can proselytize, can evangelize, can even condemn those with whom they don't agree, so long as they do it entirely on their own dime. But now the leadership of the United States Catholic Conference, the bishops and their collaborators in the Protestant religious right, have twisted its meaning and its scope. In a nutshell, here's how I would characterize what they would like the definition of religious freedom to be. We in the institutional church have the right to get as much money from the government as our well-heeled lobbyists can squeeze out of it. And then we as a corporate entity also demand that we be allowed to ignore any and all rules, regulations, or civil rights laws that we don't like. And then there's a collateral claim. When there's a clash in values between the conscience of the individual and the so-called conscience of the institution always wins. And here's how it's playing out. We know that even under this somewhat enlightened administration in Washington, hundreds of millions of dollars in grants are going to religious groups through government grants and contracts from all of us, but consider hiring persons with that money only from a tiny pool of co-religionists. So right now, today, all over this country, government-funded groups, say a Baptist group, a bad Baptist group, might be hiring someone to work in a homeless shelter and put on a job application the words, no atheists, Muslims, or Unitarians need apply. And they are still eligible for your tax dollars. This policy started under the administration of George W. Bush. It continues today. Those who like it say the policy is a form of constitutionally recognized accommodation of our faith. But I think many of you, like me, would say, no, that's actually discrimination, and it is ugly to boot. Catholic Charities is claiming that it was wrongfully denied continued receipt of the largest anti-sex trafficking grant ever made by the federal government. Why? It claims that it is the victim of anti-Catholic bias. But the administration in one federal court found it unconstitutional to allow that entity to force upon all of its sub-grantees, all the other organizations it worked with, a new requirement, not in the law, a requirement that of those girls and young women that were rescued, none of them could be counseled about contraception, much less abortion. The court ruled that to allow this charitable group to add new restrictions to its grants would impose religiously based restrictions on the expenditure of taxpayer funds, would implicitly endorse the religious beliefs of one church, the Catholic Church, clearly forbidden by the First Amendment. That case is on appeal. We know that religious right activists are writing to court clerks in every county office in the state of Maryland, where marriage equality has been the law since January 1st, claiming that if the clerk's Christian conscience does not approve of so-called same-sex marriage, as they put it, then those clerks have the right to refuse to sign a marriage license for those couples. Ultra-conservative activists writing the letters call it religious freedom. Most of us would call signing a document to be something within the scope of your employment, a simple administrative act so unconnected to any perceived moral impropriety that if you can't manage to do it, you should probably find alternative employment. We know that the Catholic bishops, not all Catholics, but the Catholic bishops and their supporters have already filed not one or two, but 43 separate lawsuits challenging the requirement in the Affordable Care Act that companies with over 50 employees cover contraceptive services for the employees there who choose it. The bishop's argument is that this violates the rights of the employer, granting to companies something even worse than corporate free speech rights that I know from talking to many of you last night you don't think much of. To start with, this would create a kind of fictional corporate conscience for management over the moral choices of women employees on highly personal matters of ethics and medical care. This is something we need to understand. This is not just an assertion that the Catholic convent doesn't need to ensure for birth control. In most of these 43 states, it is a purely secular company like Domino's Pizza that has been granted so far by the courts a temporary waiver from covering contraceptive for their thousands of employees because the CEO of Domino's happens to be a regular Catholic Church attendee. Who knew that Pepperonis to Go had a conscience that superseded the moral judgments of all its female employees? We know that cab drivers in some communities are refusing to take people to Planned Parenthood meetings, in other instances refusing to transport people who are carrying even unopened bottles of wine. They call it religious freedom. Again, it sounds to me like a kind of claim of a special right to refuse to perform your licensed duty to the public. As if this was not enough, a case was just settled in Ohio where a public school teacher was fired after he both taught creationism and branded a cross into a child's arm. Luckily, in that instance, the teacher was unsuccessful when he sued for reinstatement, alleging that it was he who was the victim of religious discrimination. You know, preposterous as these sound, if legislatures adopt these kinds of rules, or then courts go on to affirm these religious claims, the claim that religious claims always trump every other civil claim, religious or otherwise, of an individual, if they continue to rule that way, if they continue to recognize that corporations have a cognizable conscience that supersedes the free exercise rights of employees or students or other people under control of the company at issue, you might say we've lost the whole principle of church-state separation. That's how bad things could get. That's why the Unitarian Universalist Association and this church and other churches represented here today and Americans United board member and your pastor, Neal Jones, need to stand up for the right outcomes of these controversies in every venue in which you can participate. You, in this denomination, have been in the forefront of some of the greatest political and civil rights and liberties battles in modern history. I have absolutely no doubt you will be able and willing to do it again. Why? Because to you, as to Neal, there is simply no alternative. Thank you.